banks know that storage is a more secure investment than as compared to any other real estate asset. That does not mean you can just buy a storage facility or build a storage facility, cross your fingers and know the money's just going to start rolling in. Sure. That might have been true back in the 80s and 90s, where literally you could build a storage facility in a cornfield and then you'd start collecting mailbox money. There's been a lot of growth and maturation of the storage industry over the last 20 years. And so you have to do it right. But if you do it right, it can be very, very lucrative.
On today's matchup, we are excited to welcome two incredible real estate tycoons that both share a longer-term view of the wealth-building power of hard assets and investments. We're confident this matchup is going to open your eyes to the incredible power of using solid real estate fundamentals to produce cash flow and build up wealth. Let's get started.
All right. Fighting out of the mountains of Woodland Park, Colorado, and living less than a half a mile from us right here, our first cash flow combatant has been involved in real estate since the 1980s across many different asset classes. He's a real estate investor with a long-term view and appreciates providing affordable housing solutions across a range of options. He's lived in Colorado for over 30 years now, loves the great outdoors, and is obsessed with hiking, having gone on some epic worldwide trails. Representing the RV, mobile home, and tiny home park model, please welcome Pete, the Woodland Park Bear, LaBarre. And fighting out of Farmington, New York, half of the year at least, and roaming the country with his family the other half, our second cash flow crusader dramatically shifted from being a paycheck-bound W-2 employee to a footloose and fancy-free nomad and real estate maven born from his burning desire to turn his life around. He's since built the lifestyle of his dreams and now works just a couple of hours per week on his portfolio, plus a handful of hours coaching others to lifestyle freedom. He uses his remaining free time focused on his family and traveling to some amazing destinations together. Representing and putting the self back in the self-storage industry, please welcome Mike, the Gypsy Storage Rebel Wagner. And in the immortalized words of Michael Buffer, let's get ready to rumble.
All right. Mike and Pete, welcome to the show. We appreciate you both coming and sharing some insights on generating some cash flow.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
So quick reminder, round one is really just about getting to know each of you guys, your background, what brought you to your real estate ventures. Round two is getting to know about the business model that you're each in. And then round three, we'll get a little more into the details and some of the pros and cons and gotchas to look out for. And then we'll summarize it up, close it out, and choose a champion.
Mike, why don't you kick us off in round one? What were you doing before storage?
Yeah, absolutely. The short version is I went to school to become a physical therapist. So I spent 6 years and $250,000 earning 3 degrees. And then I practiced in that field for almost enough time to make my tuition back. And I actually enjoyed being a physical therapist, but I realized that I didn't have the autonomy I wanted. And so that's when I kind of switched gears toward real estate. I started, like many do, in the single family duplex, sometimes a triple or a quad here and there, being a landlord. And that worked well enough. Spent about 3 years, got, 30 units or so. And like I said, it went okay, but it really wasn't getting me where I wanted to go fast enough. And so that was, and just to set the stage, that was 2011 when I got fed up and I decided, okay, something's got to change. And that's when I made what some might call a pretty dramatic shift into the world of self-storage. I quit my relatively good paying job as a therapist and kind of sought to create my own path and reclaim that autonomy that I lost when I started working for somebody else. And I said it was dramatic because only God knows why my wife let me make that shift. I quit a decent paying job, and the facility I bought was losing $2,000 a month the day I took over with the debt service that we had on place. So it was more than a six-figure pay cut, and cut implies in the wrong direction. But we were fortunate to be in a position where we could endure that risk. And I truthfully didn't know how I was going to figure it out. I just knew that I wasn't going to quit until I did. And fortunately, looking back, it went relatively well. It went better than expected even. And we've been immersed in storage ever since.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
So 2011, we were kind of coming right out of the big recession. Did you take some hits with your single family stuff? And
We didn't. I live in Western New York, at least half the year anyways, and that's where I was investing at the time. Now we invest nationally in the storage space, but as a landlord, it was here locally to us. And our market is relatively isolated from the boom and bust in the greater real estate cycle. And so we didn't get too hurt. I was doing most of my buying in 2007, 2008. And like I said, it went relatively well. We built up some equity. We had a little bit of cash flow, but when I redid the math at that point, 3 years in, it was looking like another 10 years was going to be necessary to get me out of my day job. And that was just something I couldn't stomach at the time.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear a familiar refrain. All right, cool.
Pete, how about you? What's your background?
Well, a lot more storied, I think, and probably take too much time. So I'll just start it. I'll start in 2007. My son and I bought a small mobile home community here in Woodland Park. And prior to that, I'd owned single families. Again, much like Mike, get your start, buy a house, buy another one. And I've always been a buy and hold type person. But most of the property that we had was down in El Paso County, down in the front and down in Colorado Springs. And moved up here and decided I didn't want to be driving back and forth to check on properties. So we started consolidating here in Woodland Park. In 2007, my son and I bought this small mobile home park that had been on the market, off the market, on the market. Bought it and got our teeth into it and liked it. Still buying other properties, multifamily properties here in Woodland Park. And in 2011, there was a property, it was called the Coach Light, and it was an abandoned RV park. And it sat there. It would actually had been foreclosed on, I believe, in 2009, right at the bottom of the market.
Yeah.
And so it sat vacant. And every time I went by it, I was like, what's going on with this property? It's right on Highway 24, major U.S. thoroughfare. And kept looking at it. 2011, put an offer on the property, and it was accepted. And so then had to find financing for it because it wasn't producing any income, and put together the business plan, went to our local bank, Park State Bank, and they said, yeah, we'll fund it. And but then it took 2 years to get it closed. The bank that had it made a number of mistakes, which kept dropping the price of the property. Because of some knowledge I had with regards to water rights and wells and things of that nature, certainly took advantage of that. That property, when we started out, we closed in 2013. We did $7,000 a year the first year in gross revenue. We'll do $750 this year.
Oh, wow.
So
you still got it.
Still have it, still a buy and hold investor. I think I'll get into this later.
Okay. Hold that back for later.
Yeah.
Were you always drawn to or in real estate or in your story?
Yeah, I bought my first house in 1976 in Sherwood, Arkansas. I was in the Air Force at the time. Paid $21,000, got a VA loan, paid $198 a month. My housing allowance was $211 a month. And at the time, I thought, I'm not going to spend more than what I'm getting in my housing allowance. And 2 years later, I thought I really should have spent $100 more, because I could have got not 50% more house, but 100% more house. And the houses were going up in value.
Oh my gosh.
And so at that point in time, I realized that, number one, markets do matter. And, we just saw housing prices rising very rapidly. And part of it was the recession, was the end of the Ford administration, beginning of the Reagan administration in 80, and property prices just kept going up.
Yeah.
And so interest rates are really high, but prices, obviously when they're rising and you're a holder of real property, you don't really care.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and if you have a way to make sure they're cash flowing, then it's a lot easier to hold on to those properties.
absolutely,
Too. Yeah,
absolutely.
that's awesome. So, Mike, I guess interesting fun fact about you is you're a little bit of a nomad half the year. Is that how long have you been doing that?
Yeah, great question. And it's tough for me to debate against RV parks, because we live in one 6 months out of the year. We live in several 4 6 months of the year. My family and I have got 3 kids, 9, 7, and 3. So the 3 kids, my wife and I, we're nomadic in nature, and we just travel the country primarily through state and national parks, but we like to pop into the big cities and explore those as well. We started back in, ironically enough, as I was getting out of the landlord game, I had one house left, and it was the dog of all dogs of houses. It was only worth 25, 30 grand. It was in a rougher neighborhood, a Section 8 house. And again, we had bought it right, and we weren't getting hurt. We made a little bit of money every month, but I just wanted to get rid of the thing. And my wife and I we've always enjoyed traveling. That's actually where I had the epiphany that led me to storage. Was on a vacation in Costa Rica, where it was pure bliss. Like I was walking ankle deep in the waves crashing, and the sun was shining. My wife was sunbathing down the beach. I was sipping on a cold beer. Like it was perfect. And then I don't know what triggered it, but in a moment I remembered that, well, in 48 hours, I'm going to be back in that job that really isn't fulfilling. And nothing had changed about my circumstances. I was still in paradise, but my entire state changed. And I just went to this place of doom and gloom, instantly. And that was when I was like, all right, I'm fed up. I got to make something. I've got to make a change. And so ironically, I went home, and it was mobile home parks and not RV parks per se, but mobile home parks and self-storage that were my 2 front runners on picking on what to do next to really accelerate our pursuit of financial freedom. Obviously, I chose storage. And that's the story we can jump into a little bit later. But to answer your question directly, that last house I had, I couldn't sell. But somebody in a mastermind that I was also in posted in our little private group on Facebook, hey, we're looking to sell our motorhome, and we're open to creative solutions. We want to get into the real estate game. We'd be willing to be a landlord. So the short version of the story is I got on a train with a one-way ticket to Chicago, met these people for the first time. I knew them only virtually prior to that. They set me up in their motorhome at a campground overnight. I ate dinner, pretended I knew what I was looking at, and said, yeah, this is good enough. And the 3 of us as strangers drove about 12 hours back to New York. I showed them the house that we were going to trade for, and we literally swapped title and deeds for a 1-to-1 trade.
Wow.
And that got us our first mobile home, or our first motor home. We used that for a couple of years. And then as our family grew, we needed something a little bigger, and we decided to transition to a truck and trailer just because it fit our travel style a little better. But we're coming up on 4 or 5 years now. In the beginning, it was a month or so a year, and we pretty quickly moved up to 3 to 4 months a year. And the last couple of years with COVID, we've been 5 to 6 months a year on the road.
Oh, wow.
That's fascinating.
It is. It's well, I don't know if it's fascinating. It is very satisfying for us as a family. It's definitely not for everybody. My friends kind of pick on me and they're like, "Oh, look, Wagner's doing a little work today. Must be nice to vacation 6 months a year." I'm like, "Listen, you don't understand. If it were a vacation, I wouldn't bring my toolbox with me. I wouldn't be under the camper fixing electrical issues or whatever. It's decidedly a lifestyle, not a vacation, but it's one filled with adventure and some great experiences for my wife and I, as well as, of course, for our kids."
Yeah, that's awesome. And it doesn't hurt, I think, to have a home base that
Right.
you can go to. So I think about that often. Like I hear people that just wander, and that's a bit unnerving for my personality. Like I like to have a nest to come back to.
We definitely need this house as a refuge from the road, and then we need the road as a refuge from the Rochester winter weather. So they complement each other well.
That's awesome. Yeah, good stuff. Well, let's get into the business models a little bit. Pete, why don't you kick us off? But just tell us a bit. How does RV parks and mobile home parks how does that work from a business standpoint, and what type of returns they get?
So think of it this way. I like to use this comparison. Right now, you can probably go buy multifamily in this market for around $250,000 to $300,000 per door. And on that, you might get $36,000 in gross revenue a year. I can take that same $250,000 and I can buy 10 RV pads.
Mm-hmm.
Those 10 RV pads right now, if they're operated seasonally, will generate about $4,200 a year in gross revenue per pad. So I get a $42,000 bump on the pad, on the comparison.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have the R&M component to it. I don't have to worry about destructive tenants. I don't have to worry about turnover time.
Mm-hmm.
And I've owned both. I've owned single family, multifamily, and still do. And invariably, you have somebody. There's always that one tenant who is just. You want to go back to the Wild West where you could string them up from a tree.
Yeah.
99%
down the toilet or grease fire or whatever. Yeah.
And during COVID, we were very fortunate with our single families. We had a couple, that basically, well, you can't evict us. There's no eviction. So, and that's fine. We went through that, but the damage that people do is really what's gut wrenching, because you go in and you give them a nice place to live, and then you come back, 6 months later, and it's a rat hole.
Mm-hmm.
So with the RV side, go out with a rake, a little garbage bag, maybe you have to straighten up a pedestal, and in 10 minutes, that real estate is ready to rent again. Now, what we do is a little bit different. Most RV parks operate seasonally, and whether you're in the south or the north, it just flips depending on the weather. And some of that's just the nature of the weather, but some of it is also just the way the business has been run over the past 60, 70, 80 years. I mean, RVs go back to, they were doing RVs camping back in the 20s and 30s. So I guess that'd make it almost 100 years.
Wow.
And the model always was recreational use and, short-term stays. Well, with the housing, and I'll call it a crisis, started in 2009. You have builders stop building. You had tradespeople that left the trades, went on to learn new skills, and said, we're not going back. And so from 2009 forward, there's actually been a deficit of homes built in the United States of about 1 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that equates to 12 million, 13 million homes shortage right now in the U.S. And that takes into account, buildings that lose their functionality, buildings that are destroyed by fire, hurricanes, tornadoes and whatnot. So in our market in Colorado, there's a tremendous demand for housing. We were talking about that earlier, and just how expensive it is. There is no entry-level home available for young couples, for working individuals, for people in the service industry, people, our policemen, our teachers, our, people who aren't making enough to even save to put a down payment to get into the house. So we took our model and changed it slightly and said, look, we've got real estate, we've got pads, let's introduce a different arrangement. And this kind of fell in our lap in 2013, 2014. We were just on the cusp of the whole tiny home movement. Mm-hmm. And we went down to the first tiny home jamboree, national tiny home jamboree, and just started talking to people. And they came up, and we were just redeveloping Peakview Park. Came up and they said, can we stay here? And we're like, sure, you can stay here. Well, we want to stay. And I'm like, yeah, you can stay. No, we want to stay permanently. Yeah. And it's like, oh, yes, you can stay here. We'll figure this model out. And so what we've done is taken that, and at the time, the revenue generated was less than it is today. And the cost of a single family or the cost of a multifamily door was less. But the model still works. So now instead of getting $4,200 a year in gross revenue on those lots, we're getting $7,200 to $14,000 a year in gross revenue
with the homes,
with people putting in park models and tiny homes. And so they have permanent residency, and they have community that, for me, my niche has always been on the affordable side, even with our rentals. And so my business partner founded Habitat for Humanity here in Woodland Park, and I was on some committees to solve housing issues that go back to the early 90s. So it does my heart good to know that people can get into a house, they can own it. Yes, they're paying lot rent. But the interesting facet is we've all made money in this proposition. So houses that park model, RVs, and I'm sure you're familiar with the park models, Mike. Park model RVs that we sold brand new in 16 for $60,000 are now selling for $210,000 in this market. So people have been able to build equity in their home in a land lease lot rent arrangement. That doesn't happen typically in mobile home parks or now manufactured home communities. And there's a difference between those two. And so, when you have a single mother that comes up and says, thank you, I'm selling my house. I can't believe I'm in the position I'm in. Thank you for helping. That feels really good. Yeah. I mean, that feels better than the money in the bank. But the business model is solid as long as you don't have the government, regulatory entities stifling it and stopping it. And so there's been legislation that's been passed this past year by our elected officials, passed by the governor, that will allow now people to have tiny homes, park models in RV parks and in manufactured home communities. Mm-hmm. So it there's a lot of people that snub their nose at it. And I live in a nice house. You live in that. Yeah. But what's fascinating about it that we've seen is that most of the people who buy can afford, they've sold their home, they're downsizing. They don't want to be, they don't want to be burdened by having to maintain a home. And our biggest customer base is single women 45 to 65. And so they've had the home, they've had to maintain the home. We recognized this fairly early on, and we decided, we need to find out why. And so there were 13 single women living in our communities in tiny home park models. And we said, let's do some market research. So we took them to Swiss Chalet. It's the nicest restaurant here in Woodland Park. And we said, drink and eat as much, whatever you want. So we got them drunk and we started asking questions. We said, why?
Yeah.
Number one reason is we don't want to spend our weekends cleaning a house.
Wow.
We want to be able to get out and enjoy. We moved to Colorado for a reason. We want to enjoy it. Number two, they didn't want to rely on you and I to maintain the house. And so, if you have 2,000, 3,000 square foot, there's a lot to maintain. When you have 399 square feet, there's not a lot to maintain. They wanted a sense of community. They wanted to live in a community with like-minded people, not necessarily on the political or socioeconomic standpoint, but just we've got this one thing in common. We all are downsizing. We're all living this tiny lifestyle. And they wanted the freedom to be able to leave their home, not worry about it, and travel and feel that they could walk away. And if the thing wasn't there when they came back, there wasn't this huge loss, even though it's home. And so that's what we took away from that. And, immediately started changing our approach to what we were delivering and how we were delivering it. And obviously to who we were delivering it. So, and that's it. And here we are 9 years later, and we've got 8 communities now in Colorado with various different degrees of doing just that.
Yeah. And is that model more of like a renter model or a rent to own, or is it still the structure and the land split? Or
it is. We to do even with our modular development here in Woodland Park that we're doing, because Woodland Park wouldn't let us do tiny homes. So we said, well, we'll do small modulars. And so it's still a land lease arrangement. And the same thing persists, is that you have an entry level home. Now, people who are buying them aren't necessarily buying them at the entry level. We'll get there soon. But, effectively, the cost, if we were to include the land, go through the subdivision, do the entitlements to do that, and all of that, it would put the cost of the home, you wouldn't want to do it. Basically, you look at land, you look at the cost of the land, you look at the cost of the development, and the entitlements alone are very expensive to get there. And so if you do that and you do subdivision, then there's a whole bunch of other costs that come into play, and it pushes those homes. You wouldn't want to do a small home. You'd end up doing even a 1,200, 1,500 square foot home, so that you could charge more to make up for the cost of the land.
Right.
We recoup our development fee by that rent model. It helps offset it, and it also helps people get into homes that they typically wouldn't be able to do. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Pete, I do have a question. If I'm not a renter, but I purely would like to be an investor in your company, do you accept that? Do you accept other people to invest in the business model that you're doing?
Would you like to write a check now or later?
Well, it depends. My next question is,
Yes.
if it's a yes, then my next question is, what's the minimum investment that you accept, and what's the ROI for me?
So typically, we try not to. We're not a crowd-funded type of operation.
Sure.
We have taken as low as $50,000. We're typically looking for $100,000 to $250,000 or more, and we've had investors who have put in more, and we've had investors who have put in that $50,000 to $100,000 range. So the ROI, it really depends on the park. There's that great word, depends on the park. It depends on circumstances, but we're seeing yields. I've got to be careful. because I'll tell every investor, you're going to lose your money. You're going to lose every penny of it. If you invest with us, you're never going to see another dime. But we're yielding north of 15, and some of our communities well north of that. And our approach is this: is that when an investor invests with us,
That's an average annual percentage, or
it wouldn't be. It would be it's ROI.
Mhm.
So yes.
Okay.
Yes. Our pitch is this: you invest with us, we take a community, we take it from that $4,200 a month, and we get it to 72 to 14,000, or excuse me, not a month, a year. We get it to that 7,200, that $14,000 a year gross revenue per lot. At that point, we recapitalize.
Yeah.
And so that recapitalization, we distribute the investors' capital back to them. They get the first tranche. Their waterfall is the first tranche. So anybody that's put cash in, they get their cash back.
Mhm.
And then from there, if there's further distributions, we do that on a pro rata basis based on ownership interest.
Is there any kind of buyout? Like, is there?
No, we don't have any buyout provisions, and we don't like that.
Yeah.
We think if you've taken the risk with us from the beginning, you should be there at the end. Stay at the end. And our 5-year plan is to take the company public. So there's without giving away too much of the juice here. When we buy a property, we're typically buying it somewhere where we originally, the cap on Peakview was 50 million. You can put it whatever you want.
Mhm.
But on a typical park, early on, we were buying around 14, 15 cap. Now we're looking at, it was down in the 7 cap. We were buying at 9 caps on properties. We're seeing some movement of the cap rate going up because finance costs have gone up. But through consolidation, our portfolio is actually valued on a 5.5, 6 cap. So we end up being in markets where we become the price setter as opposed to the price taker. So that helps us. We're large enough where we can absorb and we can improve and we can do things that should have been done or weren't done in those communities. So people flock to us. Plus, we have a big enough presence in the state where individuals who are in Peakview, let's say here in Woodland Park, we've had a couple that said, "Hey, we want to go to Montrose.
Mhm.
The weather's a little bit nicer in the summertime, a little bit nicer in the wintertime. We're going to go there." Sell their house here, buy a house there. So we're just starting to see that kind of transitioning or movement in the state. We have a lot of people that'll buy them as vacation homes, and then they'll Airbnb them. So again, the money proposition is there for really for everybody.
Yeah. And on your returns, so your first tranche at some kind of recap event, is there regular cash flow out of that, or are you guys just doing annual profit distributions? Or
typically in the early years, no, because what we're doing is we're taking that money, putting it back into the property.
Right.
So on the backside, yes.
Yeah.
So once we do the recapitalization, the property stabilized and we've got cash flows, and then we do distributions. And again, it's on a pro rata basis.
Mm-hmm.
We do we'll have reserve funding, so that if we have some sort of catastrophic event, we can cover that.
Sure.
But effectively at the 5 to 6 year point, they're going to see cash coming back to them, mailbox money.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
And they've got their cash back, and they can put it into another project, or they can go in and buy some self-storage.
Yeah, that's right.
Diversify.
Did you mention, or I missed it, how long does it take for the investors typically to get their cash back?
Usually 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5 years. So that's
It really depends. We've got a property that we bought a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. We're coming up on 2 years. And at the rate we're going right now, we expect to recapitalize at the end of the 3rd year. So going into the 4th year.
Yeah, just however quickly it takes it to lift up and get it stabilized. And
correct. And this is a property they were generating $250,000 a year in gross revenue. We'll do $750 this year. So it's fairly substantial turn.
Yeah, good turn.
The only issue right now that we see with doing recaps is the interest rates. All of our current projects were financed at 3.5%. And so we don't want to recap to take some of money.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. So if rates don't come down, we may sit on that for a while, or at least look at a second to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's kind of the same cross asset classes with that business model.
Yeah.
All right, Mike. You've been patiently waiting there, soaking up some information. Give us a little background on kind of your business model and how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest with you, there are a lot of similarities between what we do and what Pete's talking about that they do. Just different asset class and some nuances, but conceptually very similar. So I am what I describe as a low volume, high margin investor. So I've been in the storage business for about 12 years. And I've done by myself just, individual projects, only like 7 or 8 storage deals in that time, which is along the same lines, I think, is what Pete was saying with him. I'm not one of those, running 5 deals at once and playing the numbers. Some will win and some will lose. We want to do low volume, high margin. Our goal is typically speaking to double or triple the value of the assets that we buy in somewhere between 24 and 48 months. So a 2 to 4 year timeline, we're looking to double or triple the asset. We do it. The reason we chose storage, as I mentioned earlier, I was considering mobile home parks and storage. And the reasons for that were because I had already tried landlording and I found all of the flaws in that model. Not to say to any of your listeners that are doing that it can't work. It definitely can. I was just looking for a strategic advantage. And when I looked at mobile home parks and owning the dirt and renting the houses, I liked that model. The part I didn't like was that it was still habitational real estate. What storage has going for it is it's not habitational, meaning nobody lives there, which means the government tends to stay out of it at least a little more so than they do when it's somebody's roof over their head. And so the storage units that we operate all fall under lien laws, which mean when someone stops paying, we have a very streamlined process that literally can be automated to lock them out of our facilities. Literally, the computer does it. I don't even know that it's happened. Lock them out of the facilities and remove their access to their belongings until they've made good on the rent. And if they don't make good on the rent, then we simply move toward auction. And again, that's a much easier process than eviction is. The other thing I love about storage is that that, as well as the physical differences, again, that Pete touched on. The reason he loves renting dirt rather than houses is because it's hard to break dirt, right? The same is true for storage units. Generally speaking, we're talking about metal walls, metal roofs, concrete floors, and some rolling doors, right? I don't have drywall, holes in the drywall to fix. I don't have plumbing. I don't have HVAC, although in some of our climate controlled, of course we do, but it tends to be treated much nicer than the HVAC in the tenant's house that never changes the filter and those sorts of things. So essentially what those differences, the physical and the legal differences, as well as some of the operational differences, we do everything. This is common practice nowadays where everybody's put the self back in self-storage. But up until COVID, the whole industry was decades behind where it should have been technologically speaking, right? So there was still somebody sitting in the office 8 hours a day when I promise me I've done it enough. I know that it only takes 30 minutes a week to run a storage facility once it's up and running. So to have somebody in the office for 40 hours a week is just absurd. And so what we've done is even before COVID, we turned everything over to an automated system where we use an online website, customer portal, if you will. It also doubles as our back-end management software. We use call centers, and then what I describe as someone we call our boots on the ground. It's somebody who does 2 to 3 hours worth of work a week, physically on site. So this is lock audits, sweeping out the units, like Peter mentioned. They're gonna rake and straighten a pedestal. We're gonna use a blower to sweep out the unit and then fix a crooked door or something to that effect. So very similar in that way. And what we're looking for are the value add properties. So anything that's mismanaged, very high expenses, very high collections, high vacancy. We want a neglected property, and we're just going to come and deploy our systems. And I maybe got ahead of myself there a little bit, but the reason to close the loop on why we ultimately picked storage was because all those differences, the physical differences, the operational differences, the legal differences, they yield a income to expense ratio that's favorable to any other asset class on the planet. Generally speaking, let's just use a multi-family house, whether it's a 2-family or a 50-unit complex. Generally speaking, the income to expense ratio is 50 to 55 cents on the dollar, meaning every dollar in rent that comes in, 50 to 55 cents goes out in daily operations. Whatever's left, that 45 to 50 cents can pay for debt service, and whatever's left after that is profit. In the storage world, the income to expense ratio is 30 to 35%. Now, we actually run a little leaner than that. We can be 25 to 28%, though I never want to count on that. Of course, it depends on insurance costs, real estate property taxes in a given market. So there's nuances and variances between markets, of course, but generally speaking, I've got an extra 20 cents out of every dollar that comes in to screw up with and still be better off than I was when I was a landlord, right? And sometimes people hear that and go, well, that's great, Mike, except it's a storage unit, so you must not be getting as much rent. And that's when people's eyes get wide, is when I tell them, well, yes, that's true, except on a price per square foot basis, I actually get as much rent for my storage as I do for a typical apartment in this same market. So just like hypothetically, let's say 1,000 square foot apartment, 2-bedroom, 1-bath in a modest, neighborhood outside of suburbia here in Western New York might be $1,200. That's $1.20 a square foot per month. My 10 by 10 storage unit, which is 100 square feet, is going to be $120 a month. The same $1.20 per square foot per month as that apartment, except I get to keep that 20 cents of buffer between the income and expense ratios that I just described as additional profit. And so there's a lot of carryover, like the collateral benefits of what I just described are, mortgages backed by storage facilities default less often than any other mortgage backed real property asset on the planet. Some of the numbers are between 6 and 8%, but depends on what data you're looking at and how long, and whether or not the storage facility was bundled with a car wash and the car wash actually took the mortgage down, and vice versa. Yeah. But the point being, banks know that storage is a more secure investment than as compared to any other real estate asset. That does not mean you can just buy a storage facility or build a storage facility, cross your fingers, and know the money's just going to start rolling in. Sure. That might have been true back in the 80s and 90s, where literally you could build a storage facility in a cornfield and then you'd start collecting mailbox money. There's been a lot of growth and maturation of the storage industry over the last 20 years. And so you have to do it right. But if you do it right, it can be very, very lucrative.
Nice. Yeah. So I think you touched on early in the conversation, and I can't remember if we were in the podcast or not, but you're looking nationwide for your properties. Are there any certain filtering criteria that you're looking for before you get just to the value add component? Or
yeah, great question. And so first and foremost, I say we go where the deals are. And right now that happens to be most of my students and myself. I'd say over half of our deals are coming in the Southeast. So Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Arkansas, Alabama. Those just seem to be where we're finding the most opportunity. Now, some of that is colored by the fact that I'm on the East Coast and I'm going to look in South Carolina before I'm going to look in California. Why? Well, because I'm a lifestyle investor and it's really hard for me to get to California. I've got to do 2 flights, jet lag, and to get out there and get back and endure the jet lag, it's 3 days out of my life just to go do a site visit. Whereas if I have a couple properties in South Carolina, like I do now, and I visit them very infrequently, but during the purchase, I obviously was seeing them more often. I could fly down, touch 2 properties, and fly home in 36 hours. And so I teach all of my students, and I'm very, very, I shine a very bright light on the fact that I love storage, and it's just a vehicle. And I don't believe in investing just to get rich. Don't get me wrong. I love money. I appreciate all of the riches I've made in this industry. But as the old saying goes, you can't take it with you, right? And so, and I also very much reject the idea that it's normal to work 40, 50, 60 hours a week for 40 years in hopes of someday maybe having the opportunity to buy your freedom back. Like, I don't think that that's a path to the best life, at least for me, and the people that I teach tend to agree with that. And so we look to buy the deals. We go where the deals are, and we keep the deals securely positioned as the vehicle toward our destination of an extraordinary life. Storage does not become, we don't invest in storage just because it's awesome and super sexy. We invest in storage because of what it can do for our lives. And so, as a quick example, I encourage my students, first, get smart locally, because it's cheaper to get smart without flying across the country to learn something that you go, oh, if I had been more experienced, I could have learned this online before I bought a plane ticket, right? But then once you're expanding beyond your market, and you're really just searching for the highest velocity deals, meaning the deals that are going to change your life the fastest, I encourage people to stack that in a way that it fits their lifestyle. As an example, my wife is in love with Mickey Mouse, probably more so than me. And so we go to Disney. We're actually leaving in 4 days, and we'll be down there for a month. The month of February and the month of October, we spend down in Florida, much of it more than I care to admit, with Mickey Mouse. Well, as you can tell from my voice, yes, the kids love it, and I love that they love it. And my threshold, I'm filled up on Mickey before my wife and kids are. So what did I do? I found a storage facility 90 minutes from Disney. Every time we drive the camper down there and live for a month, now I'm writing off more of that trip than I otherwise would have been able to do legitimately. And I'm going to, halfway through the trip, I'm going to sneak up for a day. I'm going to check on things, make sure that everything's working. It's a 90-minute drive. I'm there for about 90 minutes, and then I drive back. But that was a property we bought in 2018 for $465,000. And then I sold it 38 months later, give or take, for $1.51 million. And I didn't do much of anything to it other than deploy the systems I just shared with you. And, we put in a gate operator. I spent about 25, 30 grand on some cosmetic improvements and some functional improvements, but it wasn't like a massive rehab. The overhaul that we did was an operational overhaul. And then we just put a little lipstick on it to dress up the curb appeal and that sort of thing. But that's really our model, is we want to find those properties, double or triple them in value. And I'm very hyper focused on risk mitigation. I think there's a time and place for taking big risks, just as I described to you earlier in the show, where I quit my good paying job to buy a facility that was, most people would have said, well,
making money.
I'll see you in bankruptcy, Mike, have fun, you idiot. Right. But I knew that there was potential there, and we figured it out. That being said, I am very opposed to risk. I'm not opposed to it. I'm opposed to unnecessary risk. And so I'm hyper focused on risk mitigation. And when we're buying these defunct properties for $20, $25 a square foot, we know that the intrinsic value is 35 or 40 a square foot, because that's what it would cost to build it. And so even if our plan doesn't come to fruition, we know we can at least sell it. Even in a fire sale, we're going to get all of our money back, maybe a little extra, to justify the bruised ego that we have for our plan not coming to fruition. But I also believe very strongly that relying on one pathway to victory can leave you vulnerable. And so people often want to know, well, are we doing buy and hold? Are you doing fix and flip? Like, what's your model, Mike? And the answer is, when I started, it was buy and hold all the way. The first property I ever bought was in New York, paid $330 for it, actually owned it for 7 years. expanded it multiple times. So I was all in for about 800. And then we sold it 7 years later for 1.8. But before I sold it, I had a coach who was like, Mike, why don't you sell that thing? You've got $1 million. After you pay off your debt, you'll be debt free. You can live the good life. And I said, well, you're obviously an idiot, because I make 90 grand a year. And at the time, my systems weren't quite as good as they are now. So I was working 2 to 4 hours a week on that facility. And he's like, okay. And I'm like, dude, I only put 40 grand into the deal. I raised the rest of the money privately and through a bank loan. And then I just refinanced, recapitalized to expand. I'm like, I'm 40 grand in, I make 90 grand a year. That's 200 something percent every year. He goes, well, on your investment, yeah, but what about on your equity? And if you do the math, I had $1 million in equity and I was only making 90 grand a year in cash flow. I was making a 9% return, which is nothing to sneeze at, but I was working 2 to 4 hours to get it. And I had plenty of opportunity around me where I could just hand somebody my $1 million and they would have given me 12% without me having to work for it. Right. And so I started to calculate this return on equity. And that's when I realized that both buying and holding and flipping properties has value. So what I did on that property is I sold it. I took the $1 million, kept half for myself, put the other half into that Florida property I just described for you, and tripled that to the 1.5 million. Then I extracted that equity. And so now what we do is, without relying on the market for appreciation, we are looking to capitalize on the velocity of money, where we're buying properties low, riding the wave to at or near the peak. You can never get it perfectly. And if you try, you're just going to get hurt. So we don't try to time it perfectly, but we look at the writing on the wall. And if we can find an opportunity to sell at or near the peak, we'll do that. And then redeploy the money into another opportunity. And we just ride wave after wave. Our goal is always to force appreciation, especially super important for your listeners today with the market the way it is now, with the interest rates going up and cap rates adjusting accordingly. Obviously, that's bringing the values of the assets, the intrinsic value of the assets down a little bit. We always want to buy a property that we can force the appreciation faster than the market could ever take it back from us. That way we know we're never going to be on the wrong side of zero.
Yeah, you bring up some great points, and this is where it's a good segue into kind of the final round here, is exactly what I wanted to talk about. Like, what are the risks? Where can you caution investors? What are some things maybe we haven't even talked about? But yeah, I mean, aside from obviously interest rates and the debt servicing that we take out on any of these capital assets and things like that, what other risks can you counsel investors to be wary of, or to be asking the right questions when they come into this as an investor primarily, but also if somebody's going to be an operator or purchase one of these?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I think, the first answer is the interest rates, right? And we're going to see, I think, a little bit of fallout from this. Storage has been super sexy. It's been a booming industry for the last decade or so. We're probably on the cusp of, and actually into the first buyer's market that has existed in over a decade in the storage industry. Just to interrupt quick, do you see, is storage, I'm not so familiar with storage as an asset class, but is it also a cyclical asset class? So I think every asset has some cyclical components to it. Storage is very recession resistant, because we have, obviously demand is driven by Americans buying a bunch of crap and then needing a place to put it. When the economy shifts, and we're not down far enough on the curve yet for this to have kicked in, but I think it will, unfortunately, pretty soon, is when the downsizing, the foreclosures, the evictions, the dislocations, the job displacements kick in a poor economy. That is also a driver of demand for storage. And so the only time storage doesn't have very robust demand is kind of like right now where we are, where the economy was really good for a while and it's stalled out, but it's not yet bad enough for the negative drivers of demand to kick in. But it's not recession proof. And if anybody that says that, there's no such thing as recession proof, but it is buffered against the recessionary forces when compared to other assets. That said, just like anything, you can get kind of carried away in the frenzy. And I think a lot of it was COVID fueled. What happened is COVID shined a light on what I had kind of been aware of for a while, which is, the vulnerability that investors endure relative to the government's interference with their ability to take their investments to fruition. So multifamily, well, guess what? You can't evict anymore. I'm still allowed to do my auctions, but you can't evict. Retail and office space, well, you're not allowed to go to work anymore because of COVID. Well, we were fully remote, and so we didn't even have to change anything, and we could still do contactless rentals. We had been doing them for years beforehand, not because of any disease protection, but because I was lazy and I didn't want to go there to move a customer, and if the computer could do it for me, right? But what happened is a lot of institutional money made its way into storage over the last 3 or 4 years.
Mhm.
That drove prices way up. And I will be the first to admit that the multiple millions of dollars I've made over the last couple of years, I only earned half of it. And the market gifted me with the other half. And I'm perfectly happy to say that. Because I would have been happy enough just keeping what I earned, right? And the icing on the cake is great too. But what we saw is as lots of money came into the market, of course, it was big money, institutional grade money that went to the top of the markets. That's one of the reasons why I invest down in the tertiary markets where those guys won't be my direct competition. But there is a trickle down effect where that moved the big players down a notch and the medium players down a notch, and and now competition across the board is a little bit more robust. The folks that paid too much, what I would say is a premium, because of cheap interest rates, the frenzy around storage over the last couple of years are going to be in a tough spot. Just as Pete mentioned earlier, when their interest rates reset, there were a lot of people that bought quote unquote deals that, if you ask me, weren't a deal, and they only made any sense at all because they were getting 3% interest.
Right.
And in 18 months, 12 months, 18 months, when that resets to 7.5%, 8%, 8.5% interest, the fact that they leveraged to 90% on a property that was already overpriced is going to put them in a place, unfortunately, of probably considerable pain. And that's where I hope to be standing with a heavy cash position to save them and or the banks from having to manage those properties long term.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Across the board, I think that's coming, maybe varying timing on each of the asset classes, but for sure, a lot of this low interest only debt that is going to come due and is starting to come due, actually. That'll be where there will be some bargains to be had.
Mike, I do have a quick, sorry.
Oh, no, go right ahead.
I do have a quick question. So if somebody listens to this and would like to be a passive investor in this business model, how does that look like? What's the minimum investment and a typical ROI that you can see?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I don't actively solicit funds. I don't raise money, generally speaking. Primarily, I usually, historically, I don't have to go beyond friends and family if I do need to raise money. And more recently, we're just using profits from previous deals to self-fund our next deals. But I have many students who do look to raise outside capital, either through formal syndications or through joint ventures and that sort of thing. And typically, I will say the passive investor, depending on if they want to be a debt investor, generally we're looking at 8 to 12% debt payments or return in exchange for the debt. And whether it's 8% or 12%, it of course depends on the terms. Is it interest only? Is there delayed payments? Is it principal and interest, et cetera? If somebody wants to be an equity investor, generally we're targeting anywhere from a 16 to 20% return because we know that's what the market is going to demand. And I always tell my students that better be conservative. You need to under promise and over deliver. And the last money, that Florida property that I mentioned, I raised on, I projected a 22% return for my 2 equity investors. And 18 months later, they received an 65% annualized return each. And so target 16 to 22%. And then, of course, between there is what I would describe as a hybrid model where we can do a preferred return, 7 to 9% preferred return, and then a small back end equity kicker that's going to combined yield an investor a return somewhere between that 13 and 15%.
Great.
What about taxes? Is it a depreciable asset to some degree, I assume?
It is highly depreciable, especially if you're willing to, and we don't have time to get into the weeds of a qualified opportunity zone project and conversion and the ways where you can basically depreciate hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in a single year and then never have it recaptured. That's the qualified opportunity zone advantage over a 1031 exchange. And storage conversion projects work really well for that, because almost all of the conversion costs are eligible for year one bonus depreciation. Used to be 100%. Now we're down to 80% to write off. But even still, even without that, cost segregation studies are a highly effective way, as is just a cyclical acquisition strategy, especially when it's a value add component, because I'm sure, like Pete will tell you, on paper, as far as it's concerned with the tax man, the value add strategy creates a couple years of really big paper losses. And so if you have a couple properties in value add that in the value add phase, a lot of those paper losses, depreciation and otherwise, can be used to offset the profitability of your other assets that are already stabilized.
Right. Okay, nice. Yeah, so similar to multifamily and other types like that.
Yes.
Right. Pete, any unique risks or opportunities to call out relative to kind of what Mike was talking about?
Well, a few years back, I was talking with one of my bankers, and they said, "What's the big risk?" And not to be morbid, I said, "Pandemic or a nuclear war." And the reason is that the demand for what we provide isn't going away unless there's a radical reduction in the amount of people living in the United States. And so we're not seeing that.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing immigration, not going to get into that issue, but we're seeing immigration. We're still seeing birth rate growth in the United States. And as I mentioned earlier, the decline in the number of houses that are being provided annually to meet the need. So, effectively, I don't want to say we're low cost, because that's not a good way of looking at it, but there's always a demand for what we have. During the recessions, during the pandemic, we weren't seeing anybody leaving, moving, any of our parks. They were all thriving. So we survived the pandemic. We didn't see 100 million people die, but that's what's going to take to change the dynamic in the housing market. And even with Mike is, he's transient for 6 months out of the year, but he needs a place, whether it's a national park, state park, or a private park. He needs some place to hook up, to get electricity, to get water, to dispose of sewage, all of that. And so what we have seen through the cycles is people who could no longer afford to live where they were living transition into something that's more affordable. And so that's a good place to be, because we're always fully occupied, or almost always fully occupied. And inflation being what it is, you're not going to see a reset in values. So today we're getting $600, $700, $800 a month in rent. That rent isn't going to go to $400. It's not going to go down to $500. What it'll do is it'll stabilize over time. And you see this as well, Mike, in the storage. Yeah, you're getting $120 a foot today. The market softens. You'll be at $120 maybe for a year, maybe for 2 years, maybe for 3 years. The demand doesn't stop. It just stops appreciating unless you have inflation and other factors. So, when we started out, it was interesting because our park adjoins another park, and the adjoining owner, kind of like the guy on Tool Time, put his nose over the fence, and he said, and he's a good friend. He goes, "Hey, Pete, what are you guys going to charge?" And I said, "Well, I'm not into price fixing." I said, "But we're thinking $4.25 a month." He goes, "You're crazy. You'll never get that. Never." So we set the price at $4.25. He was at $365, and we've never looked back. And we have been the price setter in our markets. So, you basically, the demand is sufficient. We have, I can look at my emails, I can look at my phones, and I would venture that I've got 5 inquiries today for people who are looking for a place to park their RV, to park their tiny home, to park their or get a park model home.
Mhm.
And so that demand has been consistent. And if you look at the industry trends over the last 5 years, there's been over 5 million or almost 5 million new RVs hit the market. So whether people are using those for long-term occupancy, the latest numbers that I have are about 1.2 million people live in an RV year-round. Now that's small in comparison to the number of RV parks in the United States, but it's significant in that it's growing. And what happened because of COVID is a lot of people said, you know what? We can do this. We can actually be out. We can work. If we have good internet, we have good connectivity, we can work wherever remotely. We can't go in the office. So let's take the kids, let's travel, let's see the country, and we'll hook up in Colorado. We'll hook up in Letchworth State Park. We'll hook up someplace that we want to be rather than being here where the weather's bad or conditions are bad, and we go someplace else. So for us, we don't see a downside to the business. But much like Mike pointed out, you can overpay.
Yeah.
And with us, we have overpaid, but we overpaid intentionally because we wanted to be in a market and we knew what we could do versus what the previous owners were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it takes a little bit of time, and there are so many similarities between the two. And you pointed this out as well, Mike. There's so many similarities. The difference is that we do have to have staff. We have to we have to have somebody on site. We do have a park that we own here locally that we don't have anybody on site, but we're here. We live in the community, so it makes it easy. And we're a growing company, so we have to rely on our staff to manage our parks, and we find very good qualified people to do that. But again, the similarities are there. I think the big difference for us is it's the dollar differential. We can take a community and we can go from that 4,200 to that 72, 76 to 14,000 overnight. So we get it on the value proposition of changing the type of use.
Mm-hmm.
With storage, it's storage. I was curious to see, Mike, if you were doing any kind of man cave kind of stuff, because I think that's really a fascinating part of the industry. We actually have a piece of property here that we've got entitled for self-storage. So I do have a little bit of knowledge, but just enough to be dangerous. But I think the other thing is, and this is difference in just our business models. You could be in the same industry that I'm in. We're a buy and hold. And so we like the recapitalization approach, where we can get the money out. That money comes to us tax-free, and we can distribute it tax-free. And we don't ever worry about the appreciation at 5 years from now, 10 years from now. If the property appreciates and the value and the interest rates are there, we can go in and recapitalize again.
Mm-hmm.
So we can do that over and over and over again, adding additional value to our investors. So they get their capital back. They're not necessarily getting back the true value of the property, but they're getting a percentage of that. The risk there is that you're always in a leveraged position. As the property increases in value, rents go up, we leverage down. So we might start out at a 65, 75% debt ratio. When we recapitalize, we'll be at 60 or less.
Sure.
And so we just continue to take that down a notch, and it just stabilizes. It makes it easier for us to manage, it makes us comfortable with if there ever is a downside. And also we can also provide that mailbox money month after month or year after year.
Mm-hmm.
So
once you do stabilize. What else? Other than your recapitalization and tax-free distributions there, in this model, I guess because it's land, there's not really a discrete depreciation.
Well, there is. I mean, we like most real estate investors, we have infrastructure.
Yeah.
Infrastructure has a life cycle to it. We'll have fixed assets, fixed buildings on the property. And we will, with our accountant's approval and using GAAP, we make sure that we're using the right depreciation schedules on those things. But, there is depreciation, that occurs, not to the extent that you're able to get with the storage,
Larger structure.
or with the multifamily or commercial building. But there's still significant depreciation in property.
Mike, I'm curious, they brought up a question about infrastructure and self-storage. Is it pretty much just electricity that, I don't know if some of them may be climate controlled or
it's going to depend on the facility, of course. Generally speaking, we're going to have electricity, and internet, so that we can have our camera systems and our automated security gate systems to let people in and out if they've paid their rent. Then we're going to have either gravel or paved driveways. We're going to, of course, have earthwork and drainage and those sorts of things. But as far as the utilities, that's usually it. Occasionally we'll have water on a property. A lot of the properties we'll buy will have offices that were fully functional that we'll actually repurpose or just kind of shutter and convert to climate controlled storage if they already have an AC unit and that sort of thing. And of course we go, Pete mentioned, it's the whole spectrum of, your typical drive up storage, no frills, gravel lot, and that's all it is, all the way on up to, we have a facility that one building's climate controlled, the other is not climate controlled, but it is drive-in access because it was a giant 45,000 square foot warehouse that you can drive inside. And so you're putting your things into your unit, whether it's raining or snowing outside isn't going to affect you. You're already under cover to do that. And then they have the man caves that Pete mentioned, where it's you can fit a couple buses, 10 motorcycles, and there's a loft up above for a pool table and a bar. Which to answer your question, Pete, I think those are very cool. And it's my ego that really wants to do those. From an investment standpoint, I am, as I alluded to earlier, very much a lifestyle oriented guy. I currently I'm targeting my storage 1 to 2 hours worth of work a week to manage our portfolio, about 10 hours a week teaching other people how to do what we've done. And the rest of the time is spent just living life and spending it with my wife and kids who, I believe very strongly that there will always be an opportunity to make more money. And so maybe someday when I'm really bored, that'll be in the man caves, because I do agree with you. It's really cool. And I think it's also a very viable investment. But you never have an opportunity to rebuy back the time that gets past, that gets away from you. So we're just being very intentional with how we're spending our time. And what that means is keeping it super simple. I have students all the time like, well, this one has a car wash and this one has that. I'm like, hey, more power to you. I'm not teaching you about the car wash because I don't know anything about it. And if you want to learn it, great. Let's just remember, what's the goal?
Yeah.
The goal is not to buy as many shiny things as possible and figure out how they all work, unless that is the goal. And then by all means do it. But if the goal is really to find financial freedom so that you can then move beyond success and into the realm of fulfillment, let's pick the most efficient asset we can find and just run with it. And when we're bored, it just means we're good at it. So keep doing it and you'll get to the finish line fastest. At least that's the way I look at it.
Love that.
Amen.
Love it.
All right, gents. Well, appreciate that. Was awesome. And I do thank you both for investing the time with us to share all the details of your business. Certainly insightful for me.
Very insightful. Yes.
All right. So we are going to take a quick moment to confer with the judges' scorecards here.
I'm gonna hide my eye so I can't.
Okay. Yeah. Likewise here.
So no snow. I'm baffled by that.
We've got 10 inches all year. Buffalo has over 100. We're normally neck and neck with them.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I guess. Do you get out to Colorado at all?
We spent, not this past year, the year before, we spent the month of May out in Colorado.
Where were you at?
All over. We did Estes Park, did Telluride, we did
Oh, wow.
through Buena Vista,
Corner to
where
corner.
the Great Sand Dunes, wherever that was.
Yeah.
Near Alamosa. Yeah.
Yeah. What we do is we pick a state, like we did Utah this past year. We'll do Alabama and Mississippi next month after we get home from Florida. We pick a state and then we go, we beeline out there, and then we spend 4 or 5 days at 4 or 5, 6 different locations in the state, and then we buzz home to get the reset, like Mike alluded to earlier.
Nice.
Woodland Park. You need to put that on your map.
Well, if you get it to Louisiana, we're in negotiation on a park there, right on Toledo Bend Reservoir.
Oh,
cool.
And beautiful park on the Louisiana side of it's right on the Texas border. Called Wildwood. If we don't close, still go. It's a great park, great community. But I think we're going to close.
Right.
Yeah,
on.
you went
Very
there
cool.
over Christmas.
Yeah,
right?
we were there over
You were
Christmas.
down, looking at it.
I went down with my youngest daughter and youngest son. So,
right on.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've conferred with one another. We have a decision on this. So this was a great matchup. These are both great investments. We have a saying on the show that we truly believe there are no losers in the world of cash flow generations, but our rules are rules, and we are going to select a winner. So for this particular battle, I think because of the margins, the low touch, and the lifestyle components, we're going to go with self-storage on this one. Yes. It's a beautiful model from the way you've described it and the way you go about it. What I do like about both of you guys is I really appreciate, there is a flexibility within your models, but you both have a longer term viewpoint. And I think that relative to a lot of the syndication models today, where there's a fixed 2 to 3 year refi with a 5 to 6 year cash out, and that's how you're making the investor's money back. I think that does a disservice to a lot of these business models and really and the people that they serve, quite frankly. But I love the fact that you guys both have a similar outlook. Yes. And while yes, it is about the money, Mike, like you said, it is about really what does that deliver. And just having the money, you don't take it with you. You take all these experiences and translate them. So great, both business models. I love them. I want to be a part of all of them. But yeah, we're going to go with storage on this one. And
congratulations.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I do want to honor you, Pete, for what you said earlier about, the impact that your investing strategy has on your heart and how that's more important than what it has on the bank account. I think you and I are very similar in that regard. And you're doing it through helping folks find affordable housing, as well as helping your investors. You're generating returns for your investors that they couldn't generate by themselves. And effectively, I'm doing the same thing on my side, except I'm teaching my students how to generate the investments for themselves. So in both cases, we are, at least from my perspective, stepping into our roles as servant leaders and serving the people. Well, it was Zig Ziglar who said, you can have all the success you want in the world. All you got to do is help other people find their success. And it seems to me like you're doing just that. So pleasure to meet all of you today. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, likewise. We'll close with 2 things. So we like to finish with one, a little bit of gratitude. So if there's somebody or some people that have really kind of helped you along your way, you want to give a shout out to, we'll do that, as well as people want to learn more about what you do and maybe get in touch with you, the best way for them to do that. So Pete, we'll let you have the honors on.
Well, I'll say thank you to my mother for this, story that I told you earlier. Thank you to my wife, who's very supportive of what we do. In fact, she's actively involved in doing that. To our bankers, but to our investors, and to our investors as well. There's a lot there. And lastly, my business partner, Matt, who is in Puerto Rico with his tree houses.
Oh, wow.
He has a property there with tree houses. You impact people's lives when people impact your lives, and all of them every day I'm impacted by the people that I come in contact with and hear their stories and love hearing them. So, those are
Nice.
people I'd shout out to, and you for getting our stories out.
For sure, no problem there. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you, their website or email,
They can go to readycommunities.com. It's REDI, stands for Rare Earth Development and Investments. Or they can just Google search Tiny Home Community Woodland Park, and that'll take them to probably the Peakview Park website. And then there's links to all of our other communities and to Rare Earth.
Awesome. All right, thanks, Mr. Wagner.
Yeah. As far as gratitude goes, first and foremost, I'm a husband and father first. And so without my wife holding down the fort at home, teaching our kids all the things that they need to learn, we wouldn't have the life we want. So that's, of course, the first place my brain goes. Beyond that, from a business and personal development standpoint, I've been very fortunate to be members of several masterminds along the way. What I always tell people is, listen, if I've done anything right, it was I used my first round of success in the right way, meaning I didn't elevate my lifestyle and go buy that Lamborghini that would have been really fun to buy. For me, it would have been a big truck, not a Lamborghini, but you get the idea.
Yes.
Instead, I used that money to create space in my life where I could focus on, okay, more money's great, but anyone who has lots of money will tell you it doesn't ever do everything they hoped it was going to. So I found myself very fortunate to be introduced to two organizations. One is called Life in Air. It's all about how to intentionally design your life and then create a plan to execute upon it. I was a member of that for many years. Like
millionaire, but life in air.
Exactly. You're filling your life with life experiences rather than dollars. Of course, it takes dollars, so that's part of the equation. Financial freedom is certainly part of it, but really a reorientation of priorities is what I gained from that organization. More recently, I've been a very, very proud to be a member of an organization called Front Row Dads. We define ourselves as family men with businesses, not businessmen with family. I'm wearing a bracelet that says family man, etc. So father, husband first, everything else I talk about is just in the etc. part. And those organizations have helped me parlay my financial success into a life that quite literally is filled with get tos instead of shoulds and have tos, which is what I spent the first 35 years of my life doing, what I thought I should do in order to XYZ. And then, of course, to all my students who have trusted me to support them in their journey. We've created dozens and dozens of millionaire success stories, help people leave W-2 jobs that left them drained and unable to live the kind of life they wanted to live, to be the husband or wife they wanted to be for their spouse, or the parent they wanted to be their kids. And I'll never be able to express how grateful I am that they trusted me to be in my community, to be the one to support them toward that end. And if anybody wants to reach out, storagerebels.com is our free community we host. We've got about 5,000 members. You can poke around entirely for free. If there's an opportunity for us to support you in a way that brings with it an investment, then we're happy to do that. But we base the company on the idea of giving more in value than we ever request in compensation. And it is quite literally my platform to find fulfillment. And so it's not a revenue driven venture. Not to say I don't appreciate the money I make from coaching, but it's a mission driven venture. And so I'd invite people to check that out. If the other place would be thestoragerebellion.com. Instead of being the community, that's kind of just a, hey, this is what we're all about website.
All right. Beautiful. Well, thank you both again. And this was great. So wish you both the best in 2023 and beyond. And appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Appreciate y'all.
Yes.
Thank you.